Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast. I'm Dale Corpus, a senior transition specialist and real estate expert based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And like many of you, I'm part of the sandwich generation, balancing the needs of aging parents and younger family members all at once. This show is all about making senior living less overwhelming and more empowering. Whether you're helping a loved one downsize, exploring care options, or preparing for future transitions, you're in the right place. My goal is to bring you the experts, stories, and practical tools that make these big decisions just a little bit easier. And speaking of experts, today's guest is someone whose work is essential when families face complicated transactions involving health, aging, and legacy. Sara Ecklein. Sara is a licensed professional fiduciary, the founder of Trust and Honor, and also the host of the Legacy of Love podcast, where she helps people preserve meaningful family stories and navigate life's most tender moments with intention. In this conversation, we'll dive into what fiduciaries actually do and why you might need one, how Sara supports families through financial and legal complexity, and why storytelling and legacy work can be just as important as the paperwork. There's a lot to learn, and I'm so excited to share this one with you. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast, where we help families navigate senior living, real estate, and everything in between. Hosted by Senior Transition Specialist Dale Corpus, this show brings you expert insights, real solutions, and stress-free strategies to make senior transitions simple. Ready to dive in? Let's go.
And we're back, everybody. Sara, welcome to the episode today. How are you?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having me, Dale. Happy to be here.
You're welcome. And let's just jump right in. Can you start by sharing your background and how you became a fiduciary?
My path really led me to this work, feeling called to serve in hospice and end-of-life care. So I came to this work very young, about 12 years ago. So I was only 24, and
Okay.
I was with a loved one during her final 3 days of life. And I can only describe it as like it was more of a spiritual experience for me, where really the busyness and chatter of life just went away.
Yeah.
And what I was really left with was the present moment and really feeling connected to that unconditional loving presence that we're all connected to. Whatever you want to call that, God, the universe, it doesn't matter to me. But that's what death really has been on my path and journey. So at the time, I thought I'd be a hospice nurse. I started going back to school, and I quickly realized that that wasn't quite the right fit. And I actually got referred to working for a professional fiduciary out in Sacramento, California, and really the rest is history. I fell in love with the work. It brought in a lot of my skill sets and interests. There's, of course, that being of service and making a difference with the career. And of course, carrying out people's final wishes is ultimately what I do. So really serving in that end of life care space is very much part of the work.
Okay, that's awesome. One thing I love is the name of your company, Trust and Honor. By the way, I think it's great branding and it really stands out. What inspired you to launch Trust and Honor, and tell me more about the mission behind the name?
Yeah, a good question, and thank you for that. Yeah, I went through a lot of iterations with the business. So
Yeah.
originally, I thought maybe I'd call it like a mindful fiduciary company or
Uh,
the mindful fiduciary. It gets a little wording.
yeah.
A lot of people also don't understand what the word fiduciary, what that means. A
Right.
lot of people also don't understand what mindfulness means.
Right.
And so Trust and Honor felt like the right name. And I do lead with that. I'm a mindful fiduciary agency. I worked for two well-established fiduciary agencies before starting my practice. I've
Okay.
had amazing mentors for my career. I did this work close to a decade before starting my own practice. So I've really not only learned from the best, but I've also been exposed to all the different types of roles and types of work that comes with fiduciary, comes with the territory. And really starting off, I started my practice in 2021,
Okay.
and it was a bit of like a perfect storm of my partner, my now husband, and I moved in together.
Yeah.
And I migrated from the East Bay to the South Bay, and I also had finally bitten the bullet and gotten licensed myself, not just
Yeah.
working under other professionals. So it made sense to go off on my own, and it was just kind of clear that working with clients proactively would be a piece of my practice.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just my approach. I'm someone where I'd rather invest in quality nutrition and vitamins and supplements and living an active life
Yeah.
over kind of being asleep at the wheel, not prioritizing my well-being, and, downstream will spend way more money on medical and healthcare costs. So I kind of see estate planning as a bit of the same.
Right.
If we're not proactive, it's going to be a lot more painful, a lot more expensive, not just for us, but for our loved ones. So having that awareness, I think, is a lot of my approach and how I bring the work. And then I also specialize in special needs trust. So that's another kind of big piece of my practice. And I think at the end of the day, whatever hat I'm wearing and whatever client I'm serving, bringing in this foundation of that unconditional loving presence, this neutrality, this compassion, this empathy, that's where I lead from.
Yeah.
Of course, I have the credibility and the credentials to do this
Right.
work, but that's never where I kind of like to start the conversation with. Because at the end of the day, I feel like the relationships, the trust, like that is the hardest piece to build with clients and also not clients, right? Just within our life. So
Yeah.
that takes a lot of practice and cultivating, reasons why I have a daily meditation practice.
It sounds like a really natural progression of how you evolved from working with experienced fiduciaries and then going out on your own. And congratulations for doing that, by the way. What was your first case like? And also, was there a moment that made you realize that this was your calling?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, again, going back to that original story where things started
Yeah.
with death and serving of end of life,
Yeah.
the more that I just kind of lean into that,
Hmm.
that feeling of this is where I'm here to serve, and when things first happen, of course, back then, backtracking, almost 15 years now
Yep.
from that experience, you don't know that that's going to be your calling. But, over the years and just seeing like as my career's unfolded and developed, okay, what really brings me to this work? What really lights me up and brings me passion? That's really the key piece. So I do kind of tie it back to that kind of original story. I think you asked me another question, but I already blanked on what that
Yeah.
was.
What was your first case even like?
Oh, first cases. Yeah, well, I think that that's kind of the benefit of working for other professionals
Yeah.
before starting my practice, because it really was pretty organic.
Yeah.
People, I had an existing network
Yep.
and referrals came in pretty quickly. I think also a lot of attorneys love that I'm not nearing retirement and I have the experience. There's not a lot of us. I think
Yeah.
the average age of a professional fiduciary is, I think the last I heard was over 60. So that's where, if you are working with clients in the planning phase, or if you have a trust that's ongoing, like a special needs trust, that's ongoing until the beneficiary passes, it can be so much better for the client to have that continuity,
Yeah.
and working with someone young. So yeah, first cases, I've always kind of set out with focusing on special needs trust.
Yeah.
I had a handful of cases where I provided just like case management. So I
Yeah.
wasn't wearing any kind of ultimate like hat of like wearing the trustee hat or
Yeah.
power of attorney. I was working more alongside clients and families as a service provider. So I did some of that. I no longer provide that service. I just don't have the
Yeah.
capacity, and I want to do what I do really well.
I didn't realize that the average age of a fiduciary is over 6 years old. So that's something I learned today.
It may have changed,
Yeah.
but a few years ago at a PFAT conference, they referenced that, and I was pretty shocked and then not.
Well, it helps you stand out. I think you bring young energy. I mean, you're probably one of the few that even has your own podcast. It's just like you're changing up the scene, and I love it. Speaking of your podcast, what does the phrase legacy of love mean to you, as it's the name of your podcast, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, really, the name just came to me.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've had those moments when you're just like, this is what it is.
Uh-huh.
But my vision, my message, the kind of call to launch the legacy of love really
Yeah.
was born out of becoming a mother.
Okay.
So I have a now 2.5-year-old.
Nice.
When I was actually pregnant with her, I went on a women's retreat
Okay.
out in Arizona, and I had a bunch of women like, you need to write a book. And I was like, I'm not going to write a book. I'm having a baby. I don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking about. But a year in Ava's birthday was, she's the tail end. She's in that magical week between Christmas and New Year's. So it's a time where I definitely reflect a lot,
Yeah.
thinking of the year closing and starting anew. And now
Yeah.
also with her of a year or 2 years or however long I am in my motherhood journey in her
Yeah.
life. So, yeah, I really felt this call that I have this message to share and reach people upstream proactively.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I've administered, hundreds of trusts and estates.
Yeah.
I worked for very large, like fiduciary agencies before starting my practice. And so, kind of through all of those cases and clients that I've served and continue to serve, I just saw these themes that come out.
Okay.
And then also when I work with clients in the planning phase, so what that means is like I'm being named in successor roles, as typically successor trustee, an alternate agent in the durable power of attorney for finance, and sometimes also in the advanced healthcare directive and being someone's healthcare decision maker. So that doing that work, having consultation after consultation, and this is also the 1 in 3 families that actually are planning, because only 1 in 3 families plan in the United States, which that statistic is just so grim. Most people aren't understanding the function of their estate plan. And why I was discovering this was that most people that were coming in my office were asking me, only thinking that their estate plan covers like after death.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big piece, but there's so many other pieces of like planning for our incapacity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I would ask those questions, it really surprised me that people weren't having these conversations with their attorneys, and maybe they are having conversations with their attorneys, it's just going over their head. But that's where, and one of the reasons of where I was just like, it's time to reach people upstream and proactively and make this information available to everyone, because I really do believe that if we connect to the power that not just our estate plan, but, intentionally planning our legacy, that is just a doorway to not only transform our own lives, but future generations and like the whole family system.
Yeah.
Because most of us know the story where families battle it out in court,
Yep.
So much heartache, so much money wasted. And, at the end of the day, people aren't talking. And most people know that story of that kind of legacy. And so that's where I think that, as professionals that are really supporting families through these difficult transitions, there's just so much wisdom that we collectively have.
Mm-hmm.
And so joining and having more conversations like this is very much of what I feel is my purpose, and calling and reaching people. So yeah, thank you for asking me,
I
Dale.
love that. I love that. So I want to get into the nitty gritty of what a fiduciary does. I have a feeling that a majority of people listening to this episode don't even know what the word fiduciary means, and it might be the first time they're hearing it. In fact, Sarah, the first time I heard of what a fiduciary does was like January of this year. And
Wow. Okay.
I'm in real estate, and I was like, wait, what is this? I just haven't come across it as much, but Now I understand the importance of it. So it's like, what exactly is a fiduciary, and how do you explain your role to someone who's never heard the term?
Yeah, so fiduciary, like generically, if you look up like in the dictionary, fiduciary just means you're putting your client's best interest ahead of your own. You'll also hear like fiduciary used with financial advisors of distinguishing, oh, okay, we're a fiduciary, advisor. And so a lot of times people think that that's the work that I'm doing of like managing finances and assets and investments, and I don't do that work. A lot of times people will think I'm an estate planning attorney where I'm not drawing up legal documents. So I think it's first important to kind of distinguish that we're both in California,
Yeah.
and California does things a little bit differently. We have a small license called a professional fiduciary license. People definitely do this work, across the country.
Mhm.
The National Guardianship Association, I can provide you a link to that. So for listeners that are out of state, you can look for professionals in your local state that do this work. But yes, so going back to California, and let's just kind of focus in there because
Yeah.
that's what I know best. Professional fiduciaries, we began having licensing in 2007. We're overseen by the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Okay.
There's a branch called the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau. And really why that was established is for a protection for the client. They call them consumers,
Yep.
and it adds that extra oversight. Our license renews annually. We have to report to the bureau, all the clients that we're working with, the type of cases, if it's court supervised or not, and how much assets are under management. So I describe the term fiduciary as an umbrella term.
Okay.
And under that umbrella, I can act in different fiduciary roles. So we mentioned that, I kind of mentioned a bit of my practice
Yeah.
and where I focus, but some of the roles that a fiduciary can wear is I can act as a trustee, I
Okay.
can act as an executor for someone's estate or administer for someone's estate. I can act as an agent, both under the durable power of attorney
Okay.
for finance and also healthcare. And I can also act as someone's conservator or guardian. So that's generally the kind of work that we do. The work, where I specialize is I primarily work with clients privately.
Yep.
So basically I'm a private trustee. I do also act as an agent for both healthcare and finance, but I really only act in those roles if I'm also wearing the hat of successor trustee. So yeah, that's kind of this work. It's very interesting. It's also very rewarding. It's also very demanding.
Yep.
And a lot of times with clients, you're serving in multiple roles.
Yep.
Sometimes I'm only just wearing the hat of a trustee. But a lot of times I'm kind of wearing all of the hats.
Yep. And a related question then, again, for folks that are newer to what a fiduciary does, when should a family consider bringing in a fiduciary?
Oh, well, so much of what I love, what we talked about of my podcast is I think the best way to start working with a fiduciary is proactively.
Okay.
You have way more choice and say in the matter, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I want to say that not every family needs a professional.
Okay.
So a lot of families, most people that step in this role are non-professionals.
Okay.
I think I heard the statistic. It's like 92% of people doing this work are just family or friends.
Okay.
And that's absolutely fine. I do think that there's going to be a rising need. Why is that? Well, you're speaking a lot to the sandwich generation.
Right.
So families are changing.
Right.
Families are stretched thinner than ever.
Yep.
We're having less kids or no children.
Okay.
We're getting divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried.
Yep.
And families, we're also not living down the street from each other. So that's a lot of my clients that I serve. They may be the solo agers, never married, or maybe they're married and no kids. And then a lot of times it's for families that do have children, but they're kids. They don't want to burden them with the responsibility. Or also, they have busy, full lives and don't live locally. So partnering with a professional can really kind of give families that peace of mind. And for me, I've been given the feedback that I'm a pretty collaborative fiduciary. That's my
Okay.
preference of working with families. That's not always helpful. You don't
Yeah.
always need that kind of approach with kind of the bad actor situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think the best way to work with a professional fiduciary, if you need those services, um, is proactively, because then you can interview,
Yep.
speak to multiple fiduciaries. We all come to this work with different backgrounds, different approaches. So, I'm not going to be best suited for everyone. And I think really kind of where things start, where like kind of the journey begins, is people beginning to work with their estate planning attorney and talking about, okay, what are their options and what might be recommended for each family's unique situation. And I'm a big proponent with estate planning of not DIYing it.
Yeah.
I think this is where estate planning attorneys are just huge, huge, huge pieces of setting up that successful plan. It's not everything, but it's a big piece that really needs to be done right. So finding that thought partner, in your local area, I think is important. And then they can hopefully connect you with professionals local to you.
Yeah. Now, speaking of families, I know every situation is different, like you just alluded to, but what are the most common situations that people bring to your services?
What's common? Wow. Well, a few things that I speak to
Yeah.
often on my podcast is, well, one we already spoke about, is kind of this misunderstanding about estate planning.
Yeah.
Thinking that it's only after death, not really planning for incapacity, not really understanding the documents. For listeners, wherever you're at in your estate planning journey, whether you haven't started it, whether you're in the camp of most people or
Yeah.
you have started it, you should be working with professionals that you feel like you can ask the stupid questions.
Yeah.
There's no shame there. Things are really complicated. They continue to evolve. And also I think there's like different ways to skin a cat. I want to have a better analogy than that, but that's what's coming to mind at the moment. And so that's where I think building a team that you feel good about, that you like, that you can ask those questions is a crucial piece.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things that I see. The original questions of you asked was what
The
do I
common
take?
situations that people bring to your
Yeah,
service.
bring to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's one piece. The other piece that I see is just families being, kind of unique. And I think
Yeah.
we all kind of feel like alone and siloed, especially like when we're off on our own, whether you're caregiving, your parent, your kids, both. It can feel like the weight of the world on our shoulders.
Mhm.
I also support a lot of families with special needs children. And, that is just a lot emotionally, a lot physically, just on every stretch.
Yeah.
And so much when I partner with those families, I feel is just like the sense of relief that comes,
Yeah.
because those parents in particular have to plan not only for their lifetime, but their disabled child's life, because they're most likely never going to be able to be earning money. So yeah, families just not being supported,
Yeah.
families being thinner, thinner, fewer resources
Yeah.
are available. And I think that really families are changing. I don't know how much. I think maybe we're beginning to talk about it, like just beginning to talk about it, but really families have evolved quite rapidly. Again, not having as many kids or not choosing not to have children, also working longer, also living longer. And all of that is, while it's, there's a lot of advantages to it, there's a lot of kind of the
Yeah.
other side. And I don't know if we really quite reconciled that. Definitely not in the United States.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. In the cases that you work with, I know that when you have a client, you're sometimes working with the entire family, and you're dealing with emotions and just disagreements. I have a question related to that. How do you help clients make decisions when there are competing family priorities or emotional tension?
Yeah, well, it's that's hard because it's going to really
Yeah.
depend if, am I working with families proactively? Usually
Hmm.
with the proactive families, things aren't tense yet
Yeah. Okay.
because I'm also, again, working with clients that are kind of steps ahead of most. And they're really leaning into the reality that we're all going to die,
Yeah.
and being willing to have the difficult conversations with their loved ones. So with those kind of scenarios, I would say that I'm more of just like a thought partner, reminding them that this is very normal and building that team and introducing myself. Then for my active cases, that's where it's really different. Where if I'm wearing, whatever role I'm wearing or
Yeah.
hat I'm wearing, whether it's trustee or also agent for finance and healthcare, you know, of course the client themselves, I'm going to be taking as much direction from them. If
Hmm.
they're deceased or they're really incapacitated and really can't communicate much to me, then I'm really taking my direction from their documents or from any kind of supplement documents like a letter of intent. And that's where the job can be really hard. Especially when family weren't really privy to any of this information up front.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean that these conversations, that's a lot of what I have to do. And sometimes it's just needing to kind of be the bad cop or
Yep.
tell people no, and this is what's in place. And it's a lot of having crystal clear boundaries, but that's where it's also being really clear of who the client is.
Yeah.
Um, so, and that's going to depend on the case and the role that I'm wearing, and obviously, where the client's at in their journey, whether it's planning, incapacity, or after death.
All makes sense. Now, what's the difference between naming a friend or family member as a trustee or power of attorney versus working with a professional like yourself?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot
Uh,
of differences. But I would say, let me just name like maybe the top two
yeah.
that I really think of the benefits. So, when working with a professional, we're not grieving the loss of you. And that's, I think, one of the greatest gifts that I bring families is that, especially for the children, that they can still be the kids, the
Mm.
daughters and the sons. They don't have to make the hard decisions. It doesn't even mean that they're not part of the team. I work, again, very collaboratively with a lot of families where they're still like in the know and know what's going
Yeah.
on with their parents. But I'm the one that's, signing the paperwork and the documents and making the hard decisions. And also doing the administration of the trust after death. And that's a lot of work. I think people don't really quite know what they're getting into until they're in it.
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of the other piece is that as professionals, we do this all day, every day. We have, a lot of software and
Hmm.
systems built out. So many, like, I'm just thinking all the templates that I've used, that I've built out for the business where when you kind of are in the routine of kind of the post-death trust administration, like most family members have never gone through this before.
Hmm.
And it's a lot of time. And so they're having to create something from scratch during one of their life's most, sad moments during this
Yeah.
time of grief. So, and I think the last piece that's really stands out for me is that professional fiduciaries, we are very well networked.
Hmm.
So we have these extensive networks from financial advisors to, placement coordinators, realtors, aging specialists, case managers, care managers. I mean, you name it, we probably can connect you with someone that you need. And so that piece also is where being held to that fiduciary standard
Mhm.
where I don't get any kickbacks or
Mhm.
commission. I really do my due diligence of vetting and finding the best professionals to work with. And when I'm in the role of whatever trustee or agent, I'm able to hire and contract with them. But that's also, I think, a benefit of the clients that choose to work with me in the planning phase is
Right.
that they can reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to connect them with professionals that they might need throughout their journey, right?
Yeah, I like that. And it reminds me, you're like kind of you're that referral source for everybody. It reminds me of what I do too. Is I'm in real estate. Everybody always comes to me for my referrals as well.
Right.
So I connect with what you just said. Now, can you share a recent story anonymously where your work made a meaningful impact?
Yeah. Well, one of my client stories I've shared a few times that I think really helps kind of, just take a snapshot
Uh,
of what kind of the work that I can do and the ways that I can serve clients because I with this client I was wearing multiple hats and I worked with her for many years.
okay.
So I started working with her. She was basically in the middle of a healthcare crisis. So she was in her 70s. Actually, just 2 years prior, she was a busy, professional, worked full time. She'd fit in the camp of a solo ager, never
Yep.
married, no kids. And I was connected, her attorney actually connected me with her. She interviewed a handful of professional fiduciaries, and thankfully, she had enough capacity to update her documents.
Okay.
Um, and she had documents. I don't know if it was non-professionals who were named. I think maybe she had family that had moved out of town or something, or maybe had already passed away, but she really had no one. So I met with her. She updated her documents, and I acted, at that time as her power of attorney for finance and healthcare. And so, Dale, let me paint you the picture before I was involved. She had fallen in her house,
Okay.
been hospitalized, discharged, sent to a rehab facility, then discharged from the rehab facility back to her condo. And that whole cycle happened, I think, 3 or 4 times
Oh
before
wow.
I started working with her. So there was, a significant decline. Something clearly was going on with her.
Yeah.
And really, I think this is where our healthcare system, fails people. Like,
Yeah.
and what's even more just shocking is that she lived on the third story of her condo with no
Yeah.
elevator.
Oh wow.
So being discharged and going home, and she had no family again. So they're just talking to this person that's going through a crisis, and she really wasn't able to retain everything. Absolutely not. So when I started working with her, it was gathering all this information, going back to the hospitals, asking for paperwork, trying to figure out like what has been happening. And then the other piece was that her bills had been unpaid for about 6 months. So bringing her bills current, assessing what's happening. And when I started working with her, I think her attorney like helped her find an assisted living facility, just to place her in like this emergency situation.
Mhm.
But it really wasn't financially sustainable for her because she was
Mhm.
still young, and it was quite expensive. The other piece was I didn't really feel like it was the best spot for her.
Okay.
She was a very private person, right? Solo ager, like never married. And so with this larger facility, she had kind of this constant, turnover in staff and people coming in and out of her room, and she was getting more and more agitated.
Yep.
So that was the other key piece was looking and working with a placement coordinator, and I found her a wonderful small board and care. She lived with four other women. She had the master suite that opened out to the backyard garden, a rose garden, and it was just it's where she carried out her final years. She had better care. It was less expensive. It was the right fit for her.
Yep.
So that's kind of one of those, like, I mean, it's in these situations, it's hard to say like success cases,
Yeah.
but it was, I mean, and we built that special relationship. I carried out her final wishes until she passed. She actually passed away 2 weeks before my daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
I was visiting her, 40 weeks pregnant. And yeah, it just was a really special relationship and connection. And I definitely saw where it was like, oh my gosh, I made such a difference, not
You
only
did.
bringing her bills current, finding her a better situation and setup for her care needs, figuring out what was going on with her medically, advocating for her health care, but also that relationship, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You straightened out everything that was going wrong in her life. I mean, you helped out tremendously. That was incredible. Now, switching topics though, I know you work with a ton of professionals like estate planning attorneys, realtors, CPAs, financial advisors, placement agents. What does ideal collaboration look like to you?
Oh, well, I think for me, I don't know. I don't know if it's a cookie cutter thing. I mean, there's definitely things that I look for, and it's going to differ from
Yeah.
each kind of, profession.
Profession. Mhm.
But I think a bit of what I spoke to before of I love working with professionals that have a similar approach to me, that are willing to spend the time and break things down for clients. So kind of like a teacher's heart in a way.
Yeah.
I also love professionals that also kind of have a similar approach to me, that are really leading from this heart-centered place. Because I think that this is where, what makes humans unique, especially in this world that we live in now with
Yeah.
all the AI rollouts. I'm like, AI will be able to do a lot of things really well, but loving someone, absolutely. I don't
Yeah.
think a robot can do that.
Yeah.
So I think collaborating with professionals like that, of course, having enough experience and all of that part, I would always vet somebody. We're financial advisors. I only really work with financial advisors that are held to that same fiduciary standard that I am. But I think at the end of the day, who I love collaborating with is people with leading with heart, and care and compassion for our clients, because these are really difficult transitions.
They are. And then for those in the sandwich generation, what advice do you have to making planning less stressful?
Well, I think first off, it's, be really gentle and loving with yourself, because you're carrying a lot. I know we're both in this generation. And honestly, I don't know. I went out to coffee with a colleague last week, and I was having a conversation with her about this. And I said, I don't even identify with being part of the sandwich generation. And when I started describing kind of ways my husband and I support my mother-in-law, it was like, oh, I'm part of sandwich generation. So also, you might not even identify with that.
Right.
But caregiving's a lot. I mean, I'm taking care of a toddler. My husband's 15 years older than me. So that's where his parents are in their 80s.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are part of that. And so again, kind of speaking to like how families are changing, it's like, right? Like
Yeah.
there's not this like kind of traditional model anymore. Like we can have babies surrounded with us and our elders. I think there's a lot of benefit to that and beauty in it, but there's, boy, it comes with challenges. And I think it's hard to plan when there's like the house is burning down, right? Let's
Mhm.
just use that analogy. Um, so of course, whether it's your children or your parents and you're in total crisis, that's going to take precedent. But when you do have a moment of ease, of pause, of maybe not crisis, if things have stabilized, and just know that those seasons do come back of time
Yeah.
of stability, I think that's an important time to really, really take that time and for ourselves.
Yeah.
but then also reflect and figure out ways that you can plan for yourself. And that's so much of also why I have the podcast, is to kind of be that kind of hopefully thought partner and
Yeah.
provide more information for families. Also, if you're like on a commute or driving around, you can listen to this information and kind of begin to brainstorm and figure out your plan and your legacy when you're in this kind of messy middle, which I very much am in.
Yeah. Now, what makes senior transitions in the San Francisco Bay Area unique?
Well, I think it's housing.
Hmm.
That's the first thing that comes to mind for me. I mean, our housing is like the highest, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
few places that are more expensive. So as people age, I mean, and also the cost of care,
Yeah.
it can be just too much for families, and too much for people to maintain. So yeah, I think housing is a big piece. And obviously that's going to be built in, whether you're aging at home and you're building out a care team at home, or you do need to move to assisted living. I think that that's going to obviously, impact the cost of care,
Yeah.
right? That's built into it. And there's just really a lack of housing. So, and a lack of also affordable housing.
Yep.
So, that's where I work with a lot of people that do have a lot of means, more means than, most people will ever have. I'm based in Silicon Valley.
Right.
But I serve everyday people, kind of the solo ager
Yep.
that I, shared of her journey and scenario. I mean, she had about $500,000 that we needed to make last,
Mm-hmm.
between her retirement and then the proceeds of selling her condo. So, the funds were tight. So I think that
Yeah.
affordable housing piece, um, is hard. There's not a lot of
Yeah.
resources. The other piece, though, I will say is because our housing prices are so high, and we do have a lot of county resources.
Yeah.
So, again, I guess that's another piece of partnering with professionals, is that we're aware of these kind of programs and can help support our clients as they age, applying for Medi-Cal. I mean, we'll see how things evolve, especially with the current administration. But
Yeah.
yeah, for now, those are still things that is very much part of my wheelhouse and things that I do to support clients.
Yeah. Now, how do you see your role evolving alongside senior care and aging trends in California?
Oh, well, I'm really excited to see what AI does for this profession. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're in much need of innovation, of doing
Okay.
things differently. I've tried to kind of distinguish and approach this work from a different place.
Yeah.
Using technology, I mean, I love my technology. I'm primarily a paperless office,
Yep.
other than the original estate planning documents. There's so much that we can do now that's pretty remote and virtual. Of course, the in-person meetings with clients, that takes our time and is much needed. You can't replace that.
Yeah.
But that's where there is so much part of the job that's administrative, that's, accounting, reconciling. And so I do anticipate that over the next few years that that's going to be really a required piece, because it's going to provide more efficiency for us. Hopefully, I don't know, who knows, maybe it'll bring down the cost.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful, but
Right.
we're not there yet.
Yeah. What's next for Trust and Honor? Any exciting projects or growth plans?
Well, always, but nothing that I'm able to share publicly for the business. But for my podcast, I am happy. I'll share it here for the first
Yeah.
time, but I'm going to be bringing on video. I've been audio only thus far. So we're recording this in June, and in come July 2025, I'll be expanding to video and having a YouTube channel. So that's really exciting. It's definitely a whole new step up. I have to
Nice.
say, doing video is much harder than audio only podcasts. So yeah, that's kind of the next, evolution that I can share.
Nice. Yeah, nice. Looking forward to seeing more of your videos floating
Yeah.
around on social media.
Yeah.
And for families listening today, what's one small thing they can do this week to start the planning conversation?
Oh, well, you can go to my website, trustandhonor.co, and download my free workbook. I really set off with this workbook to meet families where they're at.
Yeah.
Again, maybe you have an estate plan, maybe you don't. It really doesn't matter for the purpose of this workbook,
Yeah.
but it's really an exercise for you to get clear and intentional about what your legacy means to you. And that's going to be as unique as like your fingerprint. I really believe that. Like we live such unique lives, and what are our values? What are our wishes? What do we want to leave the planet? Hopefully a better place. And so there's just a lot of self-reflections and exercises in that workbook for people to get clear and really start, planning their legacy of love.
Awesome. Final question is, I know we covered a lot. Do you have any final words, or is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't yet?
We've covered so much. I think where I'll leave listeners with is just to really remember that our legacy is not only what we leave, but it's also how we live. So choose to be courageous, choose to do the difficult work, to have the difficult conversations, to lean into reality that we're all going to die. And I think that that's so much of why people don't plan, and also not knowing where to start, but partnering with professionals like us,
Yeah.
reading and also listening to podcasts or watching on a YouTube channel. Like all of this is becoming more and more available for people. And I hope that, over the course of my career, we can really see that gap close. Like being in that 1/3 family of planning well, like hopefully everyone one day will have that plan. That's Sarah's dream world. So yeah.
Excellent. Sarah, thank you so much for being here and sharing not just your expertise, but also your heart, your values, and your vision for what truly dignified support can look like. The work you do as a fiduciary and as someone who honors people's stories and legacies is so needed, especially for families navigating emotionally and financially complex transactions. I know our listeners will walk away from this conversation with a deeper appreciation for what it means to support someone with integrity and compassion. And for those of you watching or listening, if your loved one is considering senior living and you need to figure out what to do with their home, let's talk. Schedule a free consultation with me by clicking on the Calendly link in the video description box. Learn more about my services at www.simplifyseniortransitions.com. Have a quick question, DM me on Instagram at SoulByDale. This episode is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and right here on YouTube. Subscribe to the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast so you don't miss more expert conversations like this. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next episode of the Simplify Senior Transitions podcast.